Good morning. So let's start this session with Professor Gilberto Tadeu Lima from the University of São Paulo. He's going to talk on the persistent heterogeneity in working household expectations about economic conditions and macroeconomic dynamics. Giba, you have 40 minutes, and then we have 20 minutes for discussions without any delay for our lunch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clara. Thank you all for coming. Let me start by congratulating the organizers, and especially Ricardo, who is the key figure in this organization, with several help from some people. But it's a pleasure to be here. I have been enjoying a lot being here in the last 3 times, I think. So I had the opportunity to tell Ricardo and Fabio and others that I usually enjoy a lot. I may not agree with everything that I see and watch and hear, but I really enjoy because it's usually nice topics, high-quality papers, so that's what matters to me. I'm less and less of theoretical militant, which means that I like to see good papers despite whether the theoretical framework is to my pleasant or not. So what I will be presenting today is actually another output of a line of working that I have been working on for more than 5 years, for more than 10 years, actually, usually with Jailson, which is my most frequent co-author. And basically, what we usually do is we look for some heterogeneous behavior which is persistent and for which there is empirical evidence. And then we have a double purpose. First, to provide some model, some evolutionary dynamics from which that persistence will arise as an equilibrium solution. This is the first purpose. The other one is to draw macro implications of that persistence, and also the feedback from the macro to the micro diversity. So we usually have this double purpose. So we have been working on heterogeneity of several kinds, in expectation formation, price behavior, wage setting behavior, and a few others. So if you are interested, you can take a look. In this paper, what is the heterogeneity in behavior on which we draw? It's the heterogeneity in expectation formation by working households. So this is the first piece of empirical evidence which is important for us. The Michigan Survey of Consumers in the US, which has been running these surveys for more than 60 years now, has several questions, and one of them regards what are the expectations regarding future business conditions in 12 months ahead. So this is one of the questions. The respondent is asked, how about a year from now? Do you expect in the country as a whole, business conditions will be better, worse, or they will be about the same? The survey will give 4 alternatives. Will be better, worse, or about the same? There is a fourth one, which is I don't know. But this is usually a very low proportion. The vast majority of the questions will fall under these 3 possibilities. We use a language which is not from the Michigan, which is to call an optimistic household that for which the economic conditions will be better. A neutral is a household for which the conditions will remain about the same. And a pessimistic household, working household, is one for which they expect that the conditions will be worse. So here, what we have in this figure is a plot of the proportion of each type of expectation back to early 60. So as you can see, there are some features of this figure which matter for us a lot. First is heterogeneity is persistent. You never have a single quarter for which either everybody is optimistic, neutral, or pessimistic. So heterogeneity is persistent, and we are talking about 60 years. Second, there is fluctuation over time, which is very likely endogenous. I do think that external shocks may cause changes in behavior, but not this often. So there must be, I would guess, some endogenous mechanisms which drive this persistence, this persistent fluctuation over time. The third feature that matters a lot to us, to our story, is there is no discernible long-run trend in the distribution. So, for all purposes, I think that we can say that it's a trendless distribution of behavior, of heterogeneity. So, these two features, or these three features, are important to us. The persistence of heterogeneity, the fluctuations over time, and then trendless in the long run. The second piece of empirical evidence, which is important in this paper, is the connection between the behavior of those heterogeneity over time and the behavior of the actual output growth rate. So here, what we have with good correlation, in red, we have what the Michigan survey called the balance score. So they collapse those three proportions into an index, which is the balance score, which is the percentage who thought the economic conditions would be better, minus the percentage who thought it would be worse, plus 100. So it will vary from 0 to 200. So 200 is a situation, a limit situation in which all households would believe that the economy is getting better. 0 would be a situation in which no household at all, or all households believe that the situation will get worse. And then 100 is all are neutral in our language. So here, as you can see, a lagged, there is a reasonable correlation between the lagged value of the balance score and the output growth, the actual output growth rate. So our double purpose here is the following. First, can we tell a plausible evolutionary type of story, providing some theoretically consistent, logically consistent explanation for the persistence of heterogeneity? Of course, the answer is yes. It's logically consistent, it's theoretically plausible and reasonable. Of course, I like it a lot. And I hope I can persuade you that it's a good alternative. But let me make a first methodological qualification. I'm not claiming, we are not claiming, we are not arguing that this is the only possible explanation for that persistence. Even less that it's the best one. I'm not claiming that. I'm claiming that it's a reasonable one that should be considered. But it's one that even if it's plausible, it may be explaining just part of the story. So I'm very humble about that. Don't ask me to claim more than that. And don't do that yourself. If you do, make the provision that I said that you should not do so. So it's up to you, but for me it's the plausible explanation, not a single one, not the best one. Maybe it's the best one, but I'm not claiming it's the best one. And it's not the only reason why that behavior, that pattern is observed in the data. So that's one important qualification. The second important qualification, which is the same one, but now applying to this correlation, is, of course, we abstract from zillions of things in the model. The model is a closed economy model. But of course, me and everybody knows that the output, the behavior of the growth rate of output over time is influenced by a host of several other factors. We abstract from the government. But of course, I know, you know, everybody knows that the actual dynamics of the growth rate is greatly influenced by the government. So we abstract from several dimensions. What I would like you to follow me on is in behaving as we behave when we do some econometric exercise. What's one of the most common questions that people raise in an econometric paper, in addition to, what's your identification strategy? Is, have you control for this? Have you control for that? Have you control for that factor? So I'm controlling for several factors. I know that the output dynamics is influenced by open economy issues, but I'm controlling for them. So everything that I abstract from in the model, you should see as a controlling device in the econometric sense. Because my purpose is, can I tell a plausible story regarding one specific set of channels and mechanisms, channels related to expectation formation and switching. So I'm making all these preemptive qualifications to save you from raising questions of that kind. Of course, you are not compelled to do so, but anyway, it's a preemptive behavior. So I'm aware that the model is abstracting from lots of things. I want to focus on some specific subset of channels and mechanisms. And the answer, and to try to answer this question, can I tell a plausible story to explain, first, the persistence of heterogeneity in expectation formation, and this correlation between the state of expectations and the actual dynamics of the growth rate? And the answer, of course, is yes. The macro model is going to be, it would have to be, a demand-led model. But there are several demand-led models. So for those of you who are not sympathetic with the macro model, be my guest in embedding the microdynamics, the evolutionary microdynamics, in another macro demand-led model, or some classical supply-driven type of model. So if you think that there is a baby and a dirt water in my presentation, I don't think there is only clean water in this paper. But if you think that the macro part is the dirt water, throw away the model, the macro model, the macro side. The microdynamics, I think it's what I like the most, what I think it's more important. So after all these provisos, qualifications, and so forth, let me go over the model. Of course, I will not bother you with all the details. You can check all the details. The paper is available, was made available. So it's a novel, evolutionary, microdynamic of expectation formation. Evolutionary in a sense that will be made precise soon. And then we will embed these microdynamics in a macro dynamic of capital utilization and output growth. For doing so, for the micro diversity part of the paper, we draw on two contributions from behavioral economics. The first one is the concept of satisficing choice by Simon. People satisfice, they don't optimize, they lack collecting and processing capacity to optimize, so they satisfy, so they follow satisficing behavior. But then we combine with a more recent line of research in behavioral economics associated with Kahneman and Tversky. And especially their idea of reference dependence choice. The idea is people evaluate whether a choice, an alternative, a utility is good or not in absolute terms, in relative terms. They have some reference, and then they consider some alternative good or not, and how good or bad it is in relation to this reference point. So we came up with this notion of satisficing reference point, which is this fusion of Simon and Tversky. Of course, it's an interesting question from which I want to be away from now, whether these two or three fellows feel happy to be combined. That's an interesting issue. We can discuss this after my presentation. I think that they can be made compatible in this sense. But there is a huge, I recognize, of course I hope this will not come with a referee report. There is a huge possible discussion with respect whether this combination is reasonable. I think it is, but I don't want to be delved into this discussion now, at least. Why do Jailson and I, mostly, sometimes with some other co-authors, have been doing this? Among other reasons, because it's a nice way to microfound macro. I think that microfounding macro outcomes analysis is important. But of course, I'm very uncomfortable with the mainstream way of doing so, where the macro is the micro times n, let's say. I have done myself several models with a representative firm. It's useful for several purposes, but it's not useful for several others, especially to discuss, by definition, some kind of heterogeneous behavior. But here, what's nice is the macro dynamic and the micro dynamic, they co-evolve. They are evolutionary, co-evolutionary phenomena. As we will see in the model, macro variables will influence the dynamics of the heterogeneity, and there is a feedback from the dynamics of heterogeneity to the macro outcomes. So I think it's a much richer way of microfounding macro behavior. So, as I would say, I will take lots of liberty in using the empirical evidence in a convenient way. I'm not trying to explain the behavior of output in the American economy. That's just a motivating device. But I will try to support several pieces of the model with empirical evidence, as much as possible. So there is one line of robust empirical evidence showing that the marginal propensity to consume varies across income levels and other predictors, including expectations. So there is empirical support for a modeling of the marginal propensity to consume, the average one, to depend on expectations. There is also empirical evidence, which is also very robust, showing that consumer expectations about the future economic conditions are persistently heterogeneous, as I showed in the first figure, and have high predictive power with respect to actual consumption behavior. So the way we do so, in line with the three types of expectations that a household, a working household may hold. So the subscript P stands for pessimistic, N for neutral, and O for optimistic, and W for working household. The reason why you'll see very soon. So we have this ranking. The idea is the marginal propensity to consume is higher, the higher the degree of optimism regarding the future. The marginal, for reasons of tractability, which do not compromise the qualitative results, we will normalize the propensity to consume of optimistic workers to 1. That will be to get rid of an additional parameter. More abstraction. The model is cast in real terms. So there is no distinction between nominal and real variables. And also, despite being a two-class model, so there is the functional distribution of income between wages and profits, we take the functional distribution of income as exogenously given and constant. The reason why we have it here, the reason why we don't have, let's say, a demand-led one-class model is that we would like to set the stage with this model for endogenizing through a conflicting claims type of story the functional distribution. Recovering something very important in the 1977 CGE paper by Rawtorn, something which the literature, including my humble contributions to it, have not considered, which is the key distinction in that paper by Rawtorn between anticipation and aspiration. Because I may aspire a higher, I may desire a higher wage share, but I may have expectations which conflict to that aspiration. And of course, if I have heterogeneity in expectation formation, that may lead easily, I hope, and interestingly, to a expectation-augmented conflicting claims type of story, incorporating this key contribution by Rawtorn, which got lost, and I think it's very important, the distinction between anticipation and aspiration. The Michigan survey will give us the proportions of each type of expectation. But it's just an extensive measure. It's not an intensive measure. So there is no way of drawing from the data from the survey how much optimistic and how much pessimistic a given household is. So the way we do so, we treat parametrically the extent to which an optimistic household is more optimistic or less pessimistic than a neutral household. So we have this proportionality parameter, alpha, which is between 0 and 1, excluding the bounds. So this means that the propensity to consume of neutral workers are proportionately lower than the propensity to consume of optimistic workers. And the pessimistic workers, on the other hand, are alpha as a proportion of the propensity to consume of neutral workers. So why this specification is interesting in any case? Because, you know, when you have this composition effect, it's nice to have to differentiate between changes in the extensive margin and changes in the intensive margin. So, and this specification will allow us to do so. Just another piece of notation before detailing this. Eta is the proportion of neutral workers, which of course can be 0 or 1. Rho is, in a mnemonic way, let's say, is the proportion of pessimistic working households, and theta is the percentage of optimistic workers. Of course, they sum up to 1. Given the frequency distribution of these types, if there is a fall in the proportionality parameter, alpha, this means an increase in workers' average pessimism along the intensive margin. So the proportions are constant, but the pessimistics become more pessimistic, or the optimistic become less optimistic. So it's a change in the extensive margin. And given the proportionality parameter alpha, we have an increase in optimism when the proportion of optimistic workers rise. So we will be able to differentiate in the paper these two. So CW bar is the average propensity to consume, which of course will be endogenous in the model, as in other macro models, as in other demand-led models out there. So it's a weighted, it's arithmetic average. Of course, someone could say, why not a geometric average? It doesn't make much for the qualitative results, but sometimes the geometric helps. In this case, we didn't have to rely on the geometric. What's important, as you will certainly have realized already, everything else constant, when the proportion of optimistic working households rise, the average propensity to consume rise. And when the proportion of pessimistic workers rise, the average propensity to consume falls. So the saving, the aggregate saving as a proportion of the capital stock will be parameterized by this distribution, by theta, rho, and eta, which is we can get as a residual. So now let's go for the macro part of the model. The model is a demand-led model. Consumption and investment is a demand-led model of the new Caleskian type. Amendable, extendable, as people have been showing, to incorporate other type or features of other types of demand-led models. Investment features an autonomous component, gamma, and then it's endogenous to sigma, which is the degree of capacity utilization. Saving as a proportion of the capital stock will be parameterized by the proportion of each type of expectation. So in the end, the short-run equilibrium solution for capacity utilization will be parameterized by that distribution, and a whole bunch of mu arrow is a whole bunch of other parameters. So, because here we use this technology, we have capacity utilization and growth adjusting in a given short run for a given distribution of heterogeneity in expectation formation, and then over time we will have the evolutionary dynamics driving the heterogeneity in expectation formation. So that's why we have the short-run equilibrium value of capacity utilization being parameterized by the proportion of optimistic and pessimistic workers, and by neutral workers, because as a residual we can get the neutral proportion from these two. And as expected, capacity utilization in the short-run equilibrium will vary positively with the proportion of optimistic workers and negatively with the proportion of pessimistic workers. And of course, since it's a wage-led model, it's a full-blow wage-led model, capacity utilization and output growth is demand-led of this wage-led type. The higher the proportion of optimistic workers, the higher the growth rate. The higher the proportion of pessimistic workers, the higher the growth rate. This, of course, will be able to replicate that second figure that I showed you, the correlation between the balance score and the actual growth rate. So, for those of you who think that the macro part is the dirty water, I hope to show now some clean water, which is the evolutionary dynamic. The idea, again, we are combining Simon, satisficing behavior, and Kahneman and Tversky with the notion of reference dependence. So the way we do this is the following. A working household, I, takes the actual output growth rate and compares to her reference output growth rate. So every working household has a reference output growth rate. How this reference output growth rate is formed, we remain agnostic about that by simply saying that individual reference points depend, among several reasons, on idiosyncratic features. We simply take it for granted that there is a distribution of satisficing reference growth rates across working households. Just to tell you one virtue of what I will show in a while, before I forget, the distribution of satisficing reference output growth rates, the specific distribution doesn't matter for our result. It's general to any distribution. So this is a good thing from the analytical point. So these satisficing reference points are randomly and independently distributed across workers and over time. Now, since we have this distribution, a key property of this distribution is the CDF, is the cumulative distribution function, which, as you will recall, tells us what's the probability of a given draw from the population or from the distribution be equal to or strictly lower than a given threshold. Of course, the threshold will be given by the actual growth rate. So this is the age, the CDF that matters, is this age function. And all that we need is that, of course, it's continuously differentiable and strictly increasing. Now, we analyze the switching between types of expectation in probabilistic terms. So, what's the probability of us finding a working household for whom the satisfying reference output growth rate is less than or equal to the output growth rate? Is age, which is the CDF. Now, when this happens, of course, it's a positive surprise. The actual growth rate is at least as high as my reference point. This positive surprise will trigger an expectation switching, plausibly. So the complement is 1 minus the CDF, which is the probability that for a working household, the actual growth rate is strictly lower than my reference point. That's a negative surprise, which will also trigger a switching in expectation formation. With all this, we can build these flows. This has some, for those of you who are familiar, this has some Markov switching type of, it was basically inspired by that. So take flows 1 and 2. Flows 1 and 2 are the flows from neutrality to optimism and from neutrality to pessimism. Now, what's the probability of us finding a neutral working household migrating to optimism when there is a positive surprise? A neutral working household faced an output growth rate which is greater than the satisfying one. So, of course, it's plausible that she becomes optimistic. But a neutral can also be disappointed by facing an output growth rate which is strictly lower than the reference point. That will trigger a switch from neutrality to pessimism. So this table gives us these conditional probabilities. So why in the case of flow 1 we are multiplying by eta? Because it's the probability of a working household holding a neutral expectation turning optimistic. And the other flows are analogous. Of course, the model, as any model, has to be stock flow consistent. That's why I never use this expression. Because, of course, any model has to be stock flow consistent, so I don't see any need to say that my model is stock flow consistent. So this model is stock flow consistent. If you sum up, of course, the result will be 0. Because someone outflows from somewhere and lands somewhere else. So there is no black holes as FCA people like to use the word that I never had a full understanding of that, what that means. So we get this dynamic system. Ugly, and if you check the appendix, you will see how ugly it is. But I can assure you that under some plausible conditions, this dynamic system has a unique fixed point, a unique equilibrium. This unique equilibrium can be either stable, a sink, or unstable of the saddle point type. Now, what's the nature of this unique equilibrium? There are no monomorphic monomorphic evolutionary equilibria, which means the survival of only a single type. We can show that. There is no monomorphic, a single form. There are no what we call partial monomorphic evolutionary equilibria. There is survival of two types and the extinction of a third one. There is one, I don't follow even my own, as expected, Clara. So it's useless, as I was telling you. A cell phone is useless for me. But there is this single evolutionary equilibrium. I hope you don't bother with this combination of words. I don't. There is a full, what we call polymorphic evolutionary equilibrium, which means the survival of the three types, which is unique, and it can be either stable as a sink or a saddle point. Now, there are two ways, 2 minutes, I promise. There are two interpretations of this result as regard that first motivating piece of evidence that I showed you, which is the fluctuations over time or the trend, the long-run trend. What I'm sharing with you is, to some extent, speculative because we are still working on this. This is an illustration for reasonable parameter values of the sink, of the stable situation. This is a heat map just showing the velocity and so forth. So for this parameterization, the equilibrium, which is a sink, which is stable, which is a, what would be a sorvedouro, maybe, in Portuguese. Sink. So there is convergency. This is what we call the simplex. When I say that there is no monomorphic equilibrium, the monomorphic equilibria are the three vertices. And the sides are the partial polymorphic. For instance, this side here means that the proportion of optimistic is 0, and you have only pessimistic and neutrals. So that's why we need this simplex. So one way of interpreting this stable result is to say that it provides an explanation for the long-run trend in that heterogeneity, which we saw is trendless for all purposes, I think. Now, what if it's a saddle point? I have to show you this picture that I draw. See here, so here is the saddle point.
No?
Oh, Clara, please. So to avoid clutter, I didn't draw the isoclines. No, it's here. Oh, sorry. So what I did was to draw only the stable arm, which is positively sloped, and then the unstable arm, which is negatively sloped. I can tell you this is correct. What I'm saying now may not be correct because it has to be proved and it's very hard. But we'll get there, I think. As you can see, these two arms will divide the simplex in 4 subsets. In any of these 4 subsets, there is an equilibrium, because the equilibrium is here. But then, trajectories of continuous dynamic systems cannot cross. Which means that a trajectory starting here, for instance, will follow this dynamic behavior. Since each of these subsets are closed and bounded, my hope, I'm more optimistic than Jailson, my hope is that we can use a theorem, the Poincaré-Bendixson, to show that either there is convergence to a fixed point, which is not the case because there is no fixed point, or there is convergence to a periodic orbit, oscillating behavior. So we can have 4 types of fluctuations with persistent heterogeneity. That's where we are working on right now. That's the most difficult part, but hopefully we will get there. So again, I think that I can be quite sure, except for this picture, I can be quite sure that what we did so far is logically correct. There are no problems whatsoever. You may disagree, of course, with the assumptions and so forth. But I think that the answer to the question on whether can we provide a plausible explanation for, first, the persistence of heterogeneity, and second, the correlation between the state of expectation and the actual behavior of the output growth rate is a sound yes. I'm happy. I hope you share my happiness with this. Yeah? About you, I'm pessimistic, Matthias. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Giba. Now we have 10 minutes for discussion maximum, because we need to go for lunch. So any questions? Suggestions?
Any comment has to come with a suggestion to solve the problem. Sorry.
Thanks, Giba. Just a quick no way. Quick question. Can you tell us a bit about what is happening that's bringing stability to the system, in the sense that, like, if you increase growth, more people will become optimistic, and that will increase growth again. So I didn't quite understand, more in intuitive terms, where the stability is coming from. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I have a doubt about the modeling of the choice of the household. Because you're supposing the household sees the growth rate and compare, like if it was an economist household, okay, but could you model it a little bit different and consider the actual path of the household income? For example, in the US, the Rust Belt families, they don't care if the growth of GDP is high because of Google and Apple. They are pessimistic because their sector is doing bad.
Thank you, Gilberto, for your presentation. We already discussed it in a long flight from Boston to São Paulo, aspects of your work on heterogeneity of expectations. So, when we talked, you mentioned that there is a possibility of applying it to the supermultiplier model as a macro reference. And I think that, listening to your presentation, that maybe one way to apply it would be to the autonomous parts of the consumption in terms of durable consumption, which I believe it is subject may be subject to this kind of a dynamics of heterogeneity in terms of optimistic, neutral, or pessimistic consumers. And in this case, it would affect directly the rate of growth of the system in the case of supermultiplier. So it's a suggestion for further research, if you will. Thank you.
Any more questions? I think we can answer those three and then we see.
Well, Guilherme, one thing that I actually forgot to explain was the following. In these flows here, and this has to do with the stability. So, neutral working households can only make small moves. What I mean by small moves. A neutral can become either pessimistic or optimistic. But a pessimistic, in the subpopulation of pessimistic working households, can make a small move, switch to neutrality, or a big switch from pessimism to optimism. We create another layer of conditional probability by defining epsilon as the proportion or the probability of making an extreme switch. So, epsilon being equal to 1 means that for certain, a pessimistic worker, which is positively surprised, will switch all the way to optimism. Epsilon equal to 0 means that it will switch just to the next type. No extreme. As you can see, to get a unique and stable equilibrium, we have to assume that there are no possible extreme switches. Because intuitively, neutrality is stabilizing. Because it's a middle ground in some sense. So it's a natural attractor. So if epsilon is close enough to 0, that means that there are no extreme jumps. Since there are no extreme jumps, the neutrality or the center tends to be some kind of attractor. That's the intuition. So this feedback, which is optimism, breeding optimism, it's embedded in the model. So there is this self-reinforcing dynamics. Optimism breeds optimism because it raises the growth rate, raises everything else constant, the probability of more people becoming optimistic. But then, the symmetry exists. Pessimism always also breeds pessimism. But even in this case, if you avoid the possibility of extreme switches, you can get some stable equilibrium. That's the best intuition that I hope it's well, there is more. We can discuss later. And then the question by Alexandre, I think. The choice, look, the Michigan survey, actually there is a twist here, which is the following. The Michigan survey interviews working households, which may be capitalist people, even if it's a small proportion. But then we assume that only working households change expectation. The expectation of capitalists here, on average, are constant. The reason we have done that is because we are willing to have the output growth rate, which is public, as an expected value. So people would switch behavior not based on the comparison between the satisficing and the actual, which is public, but with their expected output growth rate. That would put another layer of heterogeneity, but the model will become much more complicated. Why do they care about the growth rate? It's simple. since the functional distribution of income is constant, the output growth rate is the growth rate of the wage bill. So since there are homogeneous workers, except with respect to expectation, it's a proxy for the growth rate of their own income. So that's why they care. And then, Fábio, sure, the super multiplier already endogenizes the average propensity to consume. This would add another layer of reasons for which the average propensity to consume or to save or the investment rate would be endogenous. But it would be endogenous in an additional way to having an autonomous component. One possibility that I see, that I thought about, is having an expected autonomous growth. Unexpected autonomous growth. So that would be another layer of heterogeneity. But again, as I promised you more than once, and I have been unable to fulfill so far, not for my for my dislike, even if I have put heterogeneity in a Harrodian, Scottian type of model, a New-Classical, a classical, a neoclassical type of model, I will come at some point to the multiplier. Anyway, it's last but not least important.
Thank you. I think that with this, we close the session and we go for lunch. Thank you so much.